One of the worst consequences of this redistricting war we see breaking out across the country is that it has provided a pretext for the governor of California to do what he has always wanted to do, which is to undermine the fairness of our elections in California by abolishing the Independent Citizens Redistricting Commission. Now, the governor and his enablers insist they're only doing this because of what's happening in other states. However, the Redistricting Commission itself was opposed by Nancy Pelosi, for example, who led the opposition to its creation and was opposed by the California Democratic Party. So nothing could justify what is happening in California right now. But they have grabbed on to whatever pretext they can in order to move forward with moving us backwards as a state to the era of partisan gerrymandering. Now, the problem for Newsom is that the voters of California are overwhelmingly opposed to this plan. How do we know that? Well, California voters have voted 3 times to support the Independent Redistricting Commission. And a poll just recently came out from Politico asking voters, do you want the commission to draw district lines or do you want the politicians to get that power back? And by a 2-to-1 margin, over 60% of Democrats, over 60% of Republicans, over 70% of independents said we want the commission drawing district lines. We don't think politicians should draw their own district lines. So to solve this problem, that is to say the public overwhelmingly opposing his plan, which does require voter approval, the governor has come up with a 2-pronged strategy, which is to disenfranchise voters and to defraud them. So first, while the previous votes to establish the Independent Commission and to affirm it were done by our full electorate, he's now just summoning a partial electorate in a low turnout off-year special election to try to overturn that decision. What's more, he's thrown out all of our election rules in order to accelerate and condense the election timeline unlike anything we've ever seen, so that the county registrars are unable to notify voters, as they usually would, that there's an election going on, so that the voter guide, at least at first, is only going to be available online, such that there will be fewer polling places and vote centers for people to actually vote in. So it is voter suppression through and through in an attempt to reverse the clearly articulated and repeatedly expressed view of the California electorate. But that's not all. For those voters who do turn out, the governor needs to make sure that they are unable to express their true will, or at least have difficulty doing so. And so that's where he has made use of yet another tool that is available to the one-party rule that we have in California, which is to commit fraud on the ballot itself. Now that might sound strong language. Fraud might seem a little strong, but it is not an exaggeration. The definition of fraud is lying to people in order to get them to act in a way that they don't want to act and that goes against their own interest. And so that's precisely what's happened here. We now have the actual language that will appear on the ballot for California voters. If this were an honest description, it would simply say that we are tearing up the map drawn by California's Independent Redistricting Commission and replacing it with a map drawn by politicians in order to maximize partisan advantage. That is literally what's happening. No more, no less. But instead, we get this. So let's just walk through some of the language. Authorizes temporary changes to congressional district maps. So first of all, the changes are not temporary. They will last through the rest of this decade when the existing map would have expired anyway. They are permanent changes. Oh, and they're not changes. Changes implies you're making a little tweak here, a little tweak there. No. They've drawn a completely new map that is going to affect districts all across California and cause voters all across California to lose their representation. But this is where it gets really good. Authorizes temporary changes to congressional districts in response to Texas's partisan redistricting legislative amendment. In response to Texas's partisan redistricting. Authorizes temporary changes in response to Texas's partisan redistricting. So first, it is blatantly untrue. The initial version of this said that it would only take effect if Texas moved forward. That language was deleted. So this is taking effect, if it's passed, regardless of anything that's happened in Texas or any other state. So at this point, it is completely inaccurate and is in an attempt to simply smuggle some sort of argument or justification into a summary of the actual language. What's more, there's no mention anywhere of the fact that this is overriding the map created by California's Independent Commission. So if you just read it, at first glance, it's almost designed to read as if Texas has somehow come in and messed with California's maps, and we need to restore them to proper order. That's the impression that this is designed to give. In fact, the Independent Commission is only mentioned then in the next sentence, where it says that it directs the Independent Citizens Commission to start drawing maps after 2030. So if you're reading this casually, you might say, oh, this is the side that supports independent redistricting. After all, they're telling the Independent Commission to draw maps. But the Independent Commission does not need to be directed to draw maps after the next census. That's what they are already required to do. The only effect of this initiative is to throw out the map that the Independent Commission has drawn for this decade. And then, to make things even more farcical, it goes on to say that it's establishing a policy of the state to support independent redistricting. No, it doesn't. It doesn't establish any policy supporting independent redistricting. The only thing that this initiative does, as it pertains to independent redistricting, is to shove aside California's Independent Redistricting Commission. A few other little inaccuracies. It says that this only lasts through 2030. In fact, the partisan map that was drawn behind closed doors by the California legislature and the DCCC will last through 2033. It says it'll only cost a few $1 million. That is outrageous. The special election itself is going to cost between $200 million and $250 million. And finally, what it doesn't mention at all is that this is overriding literally the entire rest of California's state constitution. That is the language that is actually in this constitutional amendment. It says that everything else in our Constitution does not apply. Partisan gerrymandering will be the supreme law of the land. So all of the protections in our Constitution right now that are manifested in the existing congressional map will be thrown out. That means the protections where we had extensive public input in drawing the maps. Instead, this map was drawn by behind closed doors in a matter of days. The protections that say that those who draw the maps are not allowed to run for public office. This map was drawn by people who are in public office and hope to run in the very districts that they're drawing. The protections that say that the district lines need to follow neutral criteria, like keeping communities together and cannot be drawn in the interest of partisanship or to favor or disfavor any politician. That is all thrown out. This map tears communities apart. My district is torn into 6 different pieces. The county where I live is torn into 3 or 4 different pieces. And it's being designed for the explicit purpose of partisanship. Gavin Newsom has said the entire point of this map is to, quote, make California a whole lot bluer and to pick up 5 seats. Which, by the way, it says Texas's redistricting is partisan redistricting. Nothing about that in California when the very people who drew the maps have said that is literally the entire point of the exercise. So that is what's happening in California. There is this farce of democracy, this fraud that the governor is perpetrating on the electorate. there is a systematic attempt to suppress voters in order to return our state to the era of partisan gerrymandering. Indeed, we even now have reports that the leaders of the legislature itself that pushed this measure through at Newsom's behest have specifically gotten special districts drawn for themselves in order to run for Congress in. This is precisely why voters have said we do not want politicians drawing district lines, because they do so in the interests of themselves rather than the interests of the people that they're supposed to serve. And that is the ultimate evil of gerrymandering, is that it shifts power from the people to the politicians. That's why it undermines democracy and proper representation. And why is this happening, by the way? Well, it's really about one thing. The governor of California is desperate for some issue to run for president on. He has been trying throughout his tenure as our governor to find something, anything, to get himself national attention. And I have watched as he has failed time and time and time again. I remember in his first term at the beginning, he decided to create an animated Mario Kart-style video of himself racing Donald Trump, thinking this was going to get him a lot of attention. I saw during the COVID shutdowns how he would come up with one crazy scheme after another because he was jealous that Andrew Cuomo was getting all the attention. That didn't really work for him either. This is literally the first time anything he's ever done has got him the attention that he so craves. And indeed, while his poll numbers are still abysmal in California, it actually seems to be working when it comes to the far left that tends to participate in primaries, which is another testament to just how badly our leadership here has failed, that they have managed to play into the hands of Gavin Newsom, who is not a very smart person, who is not a very crafty politician, and yet this redistricting war has played right into his hands. Now, despite all of this, I do believe that we can defeat Newsom's effort to defraud and disenfranchise California voters. And the reason I believe that is because we just did so last year. What happened with Prop 36, which is the initiative to make crime illegal again in California, is a perfect case study in how the governor of California has tried to undermine democracy in order to get his way. But with respect to Prop 36, he failed miserably. Indeed, in an attempt to stop this initiative, which he led the opposition to, he came up with 3 different schemes to undermine the will of California voters. The initiative, Prop 36, gathered something like 1 million signatures and so qualified for the ballot an initiative to restore basic consequences for criminal activity like retail theft and to get treatment for folks who have repeated drug offenses. The governor opposed this effort to make crime illegal again in California. So his first attempt to get this voter-qualified citizen initiative, the first attempt to undermine it, was what was called a poison pill. The scheme went like this. Newsom had the legislature pass a number of supposedly pro-public safety bills. Now, they didn't really do much, but they were supposedly part of a public safety package. But then he inserted into those bills a poison pill that said, and this is completely novel, of what I understand in the history of legislative government in this country. He inserted a poison pill saying that if California voters were so bold as to go out and vote for Prop 36, our initiative, then all of these other bills would automatically be reversed as a punishment, if you will. So I'll say that again. The bills themselves said that if voters go out and approve this initiative to make crime illegal again in California, then all of these other supposedly pro-public safety bills will automatically be repealed as a consequence. So what was the point of this? Well, you might say, was it to punish the voters? Maybe. But the real point was fraud. What the governor hoped to do was to get these measures passed, and then what he could say on the ballot, remember how he completely committed fraud, he's committing fraud on the ballot for the redistricting sham. What he wanted to do for the ballot on Prop 36 was to say, oh, this is a measure that will repeal all of these other pro-public safety bills, so that he could trick people into thinking it was actually an anti-public safety measure, when the whole point was to promote public safety. Now, that didn't work for various reasons. Even this proved too corrupt for the California legislature. So Newsom moved on to his next plan, which was known as the Imposter Initiative. So he came up at the last second with his own very much weaker, supposedly pro-public safety initiative to put on the ballot alongside Prop 36. And so the goal was to confuse voters and to get them to prefer his initiative. And indeed, he even changed the rules for how propositions are numbered in order to put his first. Now, you might say, well, that's not too much of a problem. Voters will just pass both. But he thought of that. He actually wrote into his initiative language saying that if it got more votes than our initiative, Prop 36, then Prop 36 would not take effect even if it got more than 50% of the vote. So the literal effect of his initiative would have been to overturn the results of a Democratic election. Fortunately, this plan failed too, because the governor, in his absolute disregard for any decency whatsoever, had used the name Alexandra's Law for a part of the initiative dealing with fentanyl. Now, this was genuinely part of our own initiative. It was a way to hold fentanyl dealers accountable. It was named after a young lady who tragically lost her life to fentanyl poisoning. And the governor went ahead and misappropriated that name and used it for his extremely much weaker version of this provision. And the family of this young woman spoke out against it, and it was only then that he was forced to remove this imposture initiative from the ballot. The third scheme that the governor came up with targeted me specifically. One of his cronies, a woman named Anne Revelle, filed a completely made-up, frivolous complaint against me with the FEC. It alleged that I had transferred $50,000 to the campaign account supporting this initiative. Completely untrue. Never did anything of the sort. Didn't transfer any money to it. Even if I had, it wouldn't have been a violation of the law. But Ms. Revelle had a brief stint as chair of the FEC herself, and she has since turned this into sort of a gig where she can make partisan claims and give them a sort of aura of legitimacy as coming from the former FEC chair. And so fellow Democrats have called her out on this time and time again, that this is what she's doing. Even in her own failed campaign for state senate, this is what she did. So she files this complaint. Before I even see it, she hands it off to the LA Times. The LA Times dutifully publishes a headline, former FEC chair files complaint related to Prop 36, and then they went and showed that article to anyone who was considering supporting the initiative in order to try to deter them from doing it. Now, of course, the FEC rejected Ms. Revelle's complaint since it was completely made up, the very body that she was once the supposed chair of, completely disgraceful thing that she did. But that attempt also, of course, failed. So all three of these attempts to undermine the opportunity for voters to even vote on this fairly failed. It went to the ballot box. Newsom led the campaign against it at the ballot box. The end of the day, Prop 36 passed overwhelmingly with nearly 70% of the vote in the state of California. It passed in each and every one of California's 58 counties, even Gavin Newsom's San Francisco. It received more votes than any other measure on the ballot last year. So yes, the governor is using every corrupt means at his disposal in order to undermine our democracy, to overturn the will of our voters, to deprive our people of fair representation. But this example shows that we still have the power to fight back and to win.